Time is running out for the public to comment on the draft statute to abolish criminal penalties for sex work. In November, Cabinet approved the move, which would effectively do away with the Sexual Offences Act of 1957 and a section of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act of 2007. Now, that deadline is the 31st of this month for the public to comment. Justice Edwin Cameron, the inspecting judge of Correctional Services, is my guest tonight to discuss why it's so important for a democratic society to get behind the move and see it through to the creation of a society that brings what has historically been kept in places dark and dangerous into the light and away from discrimination and exploitation. Judge Cameron, welcome. Good evening. Thank you very much for your time. And I think given that this deadline is now looming, it's worth revisiting some of the writing, the passionate writing you've done on the matter, including making the point that criminal law should have no place in sex work. What has been its effect in South Africa?
It's been a terrifically negative effect, Iman, and the Minister, in introducing the bill to the public at the end of November, indicated that this is a women's issue, because we persecute and do horrifying things to women in our society, and one aspect of that is sex work. But the autonomy issue that you mentioned is very important to us as South Africans. The Immorality Act, which had this terrible law against sex work, also punished and criminalized people like me, gay men. It also punished and criminalized people who had sex across the color line under apartheid. And terrible things were done to people. Their bedrooms were raided, the police felt if the sheets were warm. And all of this just goes to show that this last little bit of terrible criminal lawmaking should also be scrapped. We've scrapped the laws against lesbians, gays, and other people in private. We've scrapped the laws against cross-racial sex in private. Now let us scrap the laws against women and others who wish to use their bodies to sell for sexual services out of need or otherwise.
So, Judge Cameron, the work of researchers and activists certainly paints a terrible picture of what happens when you keep sex work illegal, including the fact that workers have to stay hidden and in the dark and, as I said in that intro, in dangerous places, oftentimes at the mercy of others who would exploit them. Tell us more about this.
Iman, you're right to refer to women's safety and to women's health, their integrity and their access to health and other services. But I want to make an important point, Iman. When the Constitutional Court abolished the crimes of sodomy and other queer-directed crimes, it didn't ask the public to approve of LGBTIQ people. I don't ask people to approve of me. What I say is, don't use the criminal law against me because I'm gay. And the same applies with sex work. We understand and we are respectful of people who say women shouldn't be selling their bodies. Well, that's a point of view. It's a moralistic point of view. I don't share it. I want women to have different jobs if possible, but there aren't different jobs. A lot of the women need to feed and clothe their children. They need to study. A lot of sex workers are studying. They need to send money to their parents in the rural areas. So we're not asking for approval. It's a narrow question, Iman. The question is, how do we use the criminal law? And when we use the criminal law to persecute women and other sex workers, it has terribly negative effects.
Thank you for bringing that nuance in, Justice Cameron. I think it is a very important one that often maybe gets left behind as we get into this sort of didactic frame of how we talk about law, when there are human beings involved and there are certain, inviolable rights that should, come sort of factory set in all of us and in societies, yet it isn't always there. And it maybe goes back and links back to a point you made in some of your writing around, democracy, and in making sure that a healthy democracy takes care of not just the letter, but also the spirit of the law and some of the nuance that you mentioned in that response there.
Iman, thank you for making that point. We are in a tough situation in South Africa. I think many of your viewers are worried about governmental collapse, institutional disintegration, criminal cartels in government. There is work for the criminal law to do. There is work for Shamila Batoy and the NPA and the hawks to do. But we misuse the criminal law, we distract its focus, and we misapply its resources when we use it in this way, which only targets and persecutes women. It lays them open to abuse, to harassment, to blackmail, and even to rape by policemen. We know that many sex workers report that policemen say, we'll let you go if you give me sex.
Yeah.
So that is rape. It's non-consensual sex. And we can stop all of that with one blow. We won't remedy the ills of our country, but we will remedy a lot of problems when we do what the minister says, which is to adopt this decrim statute for sex work.
You know, Justice Cameron, listening to you talk and listening to or reading the fact that, you know, some of these laws go decades back and we're still in modern society and contemporary society like ours seeking to do away with the last vestiges of these repressive laws and these stigmatizing laws. You would think that society is in a healthier place, but there's a strong lobby, not only in other countries, but in our country. Arguments made by sections of society who believe this is immoral and a threat to wholesomeness. How do you overcome, how do you dialogue with those people?
Very important to raise that issue. The first dialogue that I'd like to have is with faith-based communities and people who work from a faith framework. Pope Francis has just said, don't criminalize gay men. And it applies to sex workers as well. You may want to convert them, you may want to offer them a better job. If you've got a better job, go and offer it to the sex workers. She may well accept it. But what we shouldn't do is to confuse our moral disapproval with the use of the criminal law. That's a very important point. Now, we are told by the moralistic lobby that the sky is going to fall. We're going to have drug cartels, we're going to have human trafficking. Of course there's human trafficking. Human trafficking is a terrible crime, rightly criminalized, especially with new legislation in our country. Human trafficking for all sorts of purposes, of children, of laborers, mostly for workers, and sometimes sex workers. But don't confuse the issue of human trafficking with sex work. Most sex workers do this because they feel they have to. It's like your informal recyclers outside your suburban home. They do that work, which is dangerous and dirty, because they feel they have to. I'm not comparing sex workers to informal recyclers. I'm saying both of them offer an important social service, which you may not want to do. Don't condemn either of them for that.
There's certainly an extended conversation about that is warranted, particularly when it comes to more legislation being needed in this particular arena. And I suppose once we have a conclusion of that public comment, we'll be able to have another conversation with you, Judge Edwin Cameron. But thank you very much for your time tonight. We appreciate it.